The warning klaxons echoed through the Galactic Station's corridors as Dr. Elena Rodriguez walked toward the docking bay, her coffee still steaming in the ceramic mug she carried. The emergency lights bathed everything in angry red, and automated voices repeated the same message in 12 different languages: biohazard alert. All personnel report to contamination stations. Biohazard alert. Elena took another sip of her coffee and checked her tablet. The readings were interesting, but hardly alarming by human standards. The station's sensors had detected what they classified as extreme toxic atmospheric conditions from the newly arrived human transport vessel. She almost laughed. If the station's AI knew what Earth's atmosphere actually contained on a bad day in any major city, it would probably shut down completely. Dr. Rodriguez. Commander Ziltak rushed toward her, his blue chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with nervous sweat. The Kalian officer was wrapped in 3 layers of protective gear, his breathing apparatus making him sound like a mechanical insect. You cannot go to the docking bay without full contamination protocols. Elena raised an eyebrow and gestured to her outfit: khaki cargo shorts, a simple white t-shirt, and her favorite running shoes. This is pretty much full gear for where I'm from, Commander. Besides, I need to check on our new arrivals. The Kalian's compound eyes widened in horror. Through his helmet's speaker, his voice cracked with disbelief. Doctor, the atmospheric readings from their ship show toxic levels of oxygen, dangerous concentrations of nitrogen, and traces of industrial pollutants that would kill most known species within minutes. The humidity alone would dissolve crystalline physiology, and the temperature variations. He shuddered. How are you not wearing environmental protection? Elena smiled and patted his armored shoulder gently. Commander, you're looking at environmental protection. 4 billion years of it, actually. Before Ziltak could protest further, Elena was already walking toward the docking bay. Her bare legs and arms moved through air that the station's systems were frantically trying to purify. Every step she took sent the contamination sensors into overdrive, their readings spiking as they detected the microscopic ecosystem that surrounded every human being. The docking bay doors hissed open, and Elena stepped inside. Immediately, the air felt different, warmer, more humid, with that familiar mix of ozone and life that reminded her of home. She breathed deeply and smiled. It did feel like spring. The human transport ship New Horizon sat in the center of the bay, its hull still hot from atmospheric entry. Around it, automated decontamination systems sprayed clouds of neutralizing agents that simply evaporated harmlessly against the ship's shields. The station's hazmat team, representing 6 different species, stood at what they considered a safe distance, about 200 meters back, all wearing full environmental suits. Elena walked casually toward the ship, her coffee cup in one hand and her tablet in the other. Behind her, she could hear Commander Ziltak frantically radioing for backup and medical teams. This is insane, she heard him say. The human is walking directly into the contamination zone with no protection. Her skin is exposed to toxic atmospheric compounds. She's drinking an unknown liquid. Someone needs to stop her before she dies. A laugh from her tablet speaker made Elena grin. Hey there, Elena. The voice belonged to Captain Sarah Chen, commander of the New Horizon. Sounds like we've caused quite a stir. Just the usual first contact panic, Elena replied, stopping near the ship's airlock. How was the trip from Earth? Not bad. 3 months in hyperspace, dealing with the usual complaints about the air recycling system making everything smell like the old subway tunnels back home. The crew's getting antsy to stretch their legs. Elena glanced back at the hazmat teams, who were now arguing among themselves in multiple languages. Some were insisting on immediate evacuation, others were demanding stronger containment fields, and a few seemed to be taking detailed sensor readings of Elena herself. Well, you might want to prepare them for the welcoming committee, Elena said. The station's convinced you're carrying enough biological weapons to sterilize a planet. Biological weapons? Sarah's voice carried amusement and confusion. Elena, we're carrying a botanical research team, 2 geology specialists, and a cultural exchange group. The most dangerous thing on this ship is probably Tommy Martinez's attempt at recreating his grandmother's hot sauce recipe. The airlock began to cycle, and Elena could see the atmospheric readings on her tablet going absolutely wild. The station's AI was registering temperature fluctuations, pressure variations, and chemical signatures that it couldn't even classify. What it was actually detecting was the simple process of a normal Earth standard airlock equalizing with station atmosphere. Commander Ziltak's voice crackled over the comm system, now speaking to what seemed like half the station's command staff. The contamination readings are off the charts. The human woman is standing directly in the path of atmospheric release. She's not even wearing respiratory protection. Elena took another sip of her coffee and watched the airlock door slide open. Captain Sarachin stepped out, and Elena had to suppress another laugh at the sight. Sarah was wearing her standard duty uniform, dark blue pants, a light blue shirt, and regulation boots. To Elena, she looked perfectly professional. To the alien observers, she probably looked like someone walking naked into a chemical warfare zone. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Sarah said, breathing deeply and stretching her arms above her head. After 3 months of recycled air, even station atmosphere feels fresh. "The locals think we're trying to kill them," Elena explained, gesturing toward the distant hazmat teams. "Apparently our normal breathing is considered a weapon of mass destruction." Sarah looked thoughtfully at the assembled aliens, all of whom were now backing even further away. "That explains the reception party. Although I have to admit, it's refreshing to be feared for something we do naturally rather than our nuclear weapons for once." More crew members began emerging from the new horizon. Dr. James Wong, the team's botanist, stepped out wearing shorts and a Hawaiian shirt that featured cartoon pineapples. He immediately began examining the station's decorative plants with professional interest, seemingly oblivious to the panic his presence was causing. "Fascinating," he said to Elena, pointing at a crystalline formation that passed for flora in Kalian culture. "The mineral composition suggests a silicon-based photosynthetic process. I wonder if they've achieved full atmospheric integration or if they require supplemental nutrients." Behind him, Martinez emerged carrying a small cooler and wearing what could only be described as beach attire, flip-flops, board shorts, and a tank top that read Earth's finest. He set the cooler down and opened it, releasing a small cloud of cold air that made the station's sensors scream warnings about rapid temperature variation. "Anyone want a cold one?" Martinez called out, pulling a bottle of beer from the cooler. "I know it's been a long trip, but we made it." The sound of 12 different species simultaneously panicking echoed through the docking bay. Emergency protocols activated, sealing blast doors and flooding the area with warnings about chemical attacks. The station's AI began broadcasting evacuation orders in 27 languages while automated defense systems came online. Elena simply stood there, sipping her coffee and watching her colleagues behave exactly like humans always did when they arrived somewhere new. She thought about trying to explain to the station's inhabitants that this was completely normal behavior, but she suspected they wouldn't believe her. "Dr. Rodriguez." Commander Ziltak's voice was now coming through external speakers, as he'd apparently retreated to what he considered a safer distance. "Please evacuate the contamination zone immediately. The atmospheric weapons have been deployed, and the temperature variance weapons are now active." Elena looked at Martinez, who was now offering a beer to Dr. Wong while both of them stood in air that was, by galactic standards, roughly equivalent to standing inside an active volcano filled with acid rain. They were chatting about the botanical samples Wong wanted to collect and whether the station's soil samples would be worth analyzing. "Commander," Elena called back, raising her voice to be heard over the alarms. "These aren't weapons. This is just how humans live." "That's impossible," came the reply. "No biological entity could survive in those conditions without protective equipment." Sarachin joined the conversation, speaking toward the speakers with the patient tone of someone who had dealt with this situation before. "Commander Ziltak, I presume? This is Captain Chen of the New Horizon. I understand your concern, but, I assure you, we're operating within normal parameters for our species. These atmospheric conditions are actually quite mild by our standards." "Mild?" The Kalian's voice cracked with disbelief. "Captain, our sensors indicate atmospheric toxicity levels that would require level 5 hazmat protocols for any known species. The temperature variations alone." Commander, Elena interrupted gently, what's the current temperature in this bay? 22 degrees Celsius, came the prompt reply. Which is within acceptable parameters for most species, but the variance readings from your ship suggest fluctuations of plus or minus 3 degrees, which could cause thermal shock in unprotected individuals. Elena looked around at her colleagues, all of whom were standing comfortably in what they would consider perfect room temperature, wearing clothes appropriate for a mild spring day. She realized that what the aliens were seeing wasn't just cultural difference, it was a fundamental gap in understanding what constituted habitable conditions. Commander, she said carefully, I'm going to share some information with you that might be difficult to process. The temperature range you're worried about? On Earth, we call that room temperature. The atmospheric composition that's triggering your contamination alarms? That's what we breathe every day. The chemical traces your sensors are detecting aren't weapons, they're just us. A long silence followed, broken only by the continued sound of alarms and the casual conversation between Martinez and Wong about whether the station's cafeteria would have anything spicy enough to be worth eating. Finally, Ziltak's voice returned, smaller and more uncertain than before. Dr. Rodriguez, are you telling me that your species naturally exists in conditions that our best protective equipment can barely handle? Elena thought about it for a moment, considering how to explain 4 billion years of evolution on a planet that most of the galaxy would consider a death world. She thought about summer days in Arizona, winter nights in Alaska, the pressure changes of mountain climbing, the chemical soup of urban air, and the countless environmental challenges that humans faced and overcame every single day without even thinking about it. Commander, she said finally, I'm telling you that what you're seeing as a contamination event, we're experiencing as a lovely spring afternoon. The emergency meeting in Conference Room 7 had been going on for 3 hours, and Elena could see the strain on the alien delegates' faces. Well, the ones that had faces, anyway. The crystalline representative was literally vibrating with anxiety, creating a soft chiming sound every few minutes, while the Aquatic Confederation's envoy had turned such a deep shade of purple that Elena worried about their circulatory system. Let me understand this correctly, said Ambassador Veltar of the Hegemony Coalition, his 6 arms gesticulating wildly. Your species evolved on a planet where the atmospheric conditions that triggered our highest level contamination alerts are considered pleasant? Elena nodded, taking a sip from her water bottle. The simple act made half the room flinch. Pleasant, normal, habitable, however you want to describe it. Earth's atmosphere is roughly 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, with trace amounts of carbon dioxide, water vapor, and other gases. The temperature where we're sitting right now would be considered perfect for a spring picnic. But the toxicity readings. Commander Ziltak protested, his breathing apparatus fogging up with stress. Your ship's atmospheric release contained compounds that our sensors classified as industrial waste. Dr. Wong, who had been quietly documenting the various alien plant life through the conference room's windows, looked up from his tablet. Commander, what specific compounds are you referring to? Because if it's what I think it is, you might be detecting the natural byproducts of human metabolism. The room fell silent except for the increasingly frantic chiming of the crystalline delegate. Human metabolism? The question came from Dr. Cathara, the station's chief medical officer, whose insectoid features were barely visible beneath layers of protective equipment. You mean those compounds are produced by your biological processes? Among other things, Wong replied cheerfully. Humans exhale carbon dioxide, water vapor, and trace amounts of various other compounds. Our skin releases oils, pheromones, dead cellular matter, and microscopic organisms that form part of our natural microbiome. It's all perfectly normal. Elena watched as the translator struggled to find equivalent concepts in the various alien languages. The aquatic delegate had now turned a shade of purple so dark it was almost black. Dr. Wong, Ambassador Veltar said slowly, are you saying that your species naturally emits what we would classify as biological contaminants? Well, I wouldn't call them contaminants, Wong replied. They're just part of our ecosystem. Every human carries millions of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, viruses that help us digest food, protect us from harmful pathogens, and maintain our overall health. We're not just individuals, we're walking ecosystems. The chiming from the crystalline delegate reached a fever pitch before stopping abruptly. Elena glanced over with concern, but the being seemed to have simply gone into some kind of shock-induced hibernation. Commander Ziltak was frantically taking notes, his multiple writing appendages moving across several tablets simultaneously. Walking ecosystems, he muttered. Millions of microorganisms per individual. Natural emission of industrial-grade compounds. How did your species survive to develop space travel? Elena exchanged a look with Captain Chen, who had been sitting quietly through most of the meeting. Sarah cleared her throat and leaned forward. Commander, I think there might be a fundamental misunderstanding here about what constitutes a hostile environment. May I ask what the environmental conditions are like on your homeworld? Kalos Prime maintains optimal atmospheric conditions, Ziltak replied proudly. Pure nitrogen-argon atmosphere, carefully regulated temperature never varying more than 1 degree, sterile environmental protocols maintaining zero biological contamination, and pressure systems optimized for our physiology. That sounds... Elena paused, trying to find a diplomatic way to phrase it. Very controlled. What about natural weather patterns? Seasonal changes? Biodiversity? Weather patterns would be chaotic and dangerous, Dr. Kethara interjected. Seasonal changes would disrupt atmospheric balance. As for biodiversity... She consulted her tablet. Our species eliminated most biological variables from our environment approximately 2,000 years ago when we achieved full technological control of our biosphere. Elena felt a sudden pang of sympathy for these beings. They had created perfect, controlled worlds for themselves, eliminating the chaos and unpredictability that had driven human evolution for millions of years. No wonder they were terrified of humanity's casual relationship with environmental variables. Dr. Kethara, Elena said gently, on Earth, we have weather patterns that can vary temperature by 40 degrees in a single day. We have storms that can level cities, seasonal changes that completely alter the landscape, and ecosystems so complex that we're still discovering new species every year. And humans live everywhere, from frozen polar regions to scorching deserts, from high mountain peaks to deep underground caves. That's impossible, the medical officer whispered. No species could adapt to such extreme environmental variation without technological protection. Captain Chen smiled and pulled out her personal tablet, scrolling through what Elena recognized as vacation photos. Commander, would you like to see some images of human recreational activities? Before anyone could object, Chen had activated the room's holographic display. The first image showed a group of humans surfing in ocean waves during a thunderstorm, their faces filled with joy and excitement as lightning illuminated the sky behind them. The aquatic delegate made a sound like a deflating balloon. The next image showed mountain climbers scaling an ice-covered peak, wearing minimal protective gear in temperatures that would freeze most known species solid. They were smiling and giving thumbs-up gestures to the camera. Commander Ziltak dropped one of his tablets. The third image was Elena's personal favorite, a beach volleyball tournament taking place in Death Valley, California, during summer. The temperature gauge visible in the corner of the image read 52 degrees Celsius. The humans playing volleyball were wearing shorts, tank tops, and sunglasses. Several were drinking ice-cold beverages and laughing. The crystalline delegate's hibernation deepened. These are recreational activities? Dr. Kethara's voice was barely above a whisper. Your species voluntarily exposes itself to these conditions for entertainment? Oh, this is just the beginning, Chen replied, scrolling to more images. Elena, want to explain extreme sports? Elena grinned. Well, there's skydiving, jumping out of perfectly good aircraft for fun. Rock climbing without safety equipment. Cave diving in underwater systems. Volcano surfing. Desert racing. Ice swimming. Storm chasing. With each activity Elena described, the alien delegates seemed to shrink further into their protective equipment. Ambassador Veltar was frantically making notes while simultaneously trying to calculate the survival odds for each activity. But why? The question came from the youngest delegate present, a member of the Pacifist Alliance whose species had evolved on a world with such stable conditions that they had never developed concepts like risk or danger. Why would you voluntarily expose yourselves to potentially fatal environmental conditions? Elena thought about how to explain the human relationship with challenge, risk, and the constant drive to push boundaries. How could she describe the feeling of standing on a mountaintop after a difficult climb, or the rush of adrenaline that came from testing oneself against nature's extremes? Because, she said finally, those challenges made us who we are. Every extreme condition our species encountered didn't just threaten us, it taught us. Cold weather taught us to make better clothing and shelter. Hot climates taught us about hydration and adaptation. Storms taught us about weather patterns and engineering. Dangerous predators taught us about cooperation and tool use. Dr. Wong nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Our entire technological development was driven by environmental challenges. We didn't build spacecraft because we wanted to explore the universe, we built them because we learned how to solve problems by surviving in conditions that would kill most species. The atmospheric processing systems on our ships aren't advanced technology for us, Captain Chen added. They're just slightly modified versions of the life support systems we use for underwater exploration or high-altitude research. We've been solving these problems for thousands of years. Commander Ziltak was now taking notes so frantically that Elena worried about his writing appendages cramping. So when you say the conditions on your ship feel like spring? I mean they're comfortable, Elena confirmed. Mild temperature, pleasant humidity, good air circulation. If anything, they're probably more comfortable than most places on Earth. We've been living in environments that would require your most advanced protective equipment since before we discovered fire. Ambassador Veltar leaned back in his chair, or what passed for a chair for his species. Dr. Rodriguez, I need to ask you a direct question, and please understand that this comes from a place of genuine scientific curiosity, not accusation. Elena nodded for him to continue. Is your species aware that by most galactic standards, your homeworld would be classified as a Class 12 death world? The environmental conditions you describe as normal are more extreme than most species encounter in their worst-case emergency scenarios. Elena blinked in surprise. She had known that Earth was unusual by galactic standards, but a Class 12 death world? That seemed excessive. Ambassador, she said carefully, what would be an example of a Class 12 threat? Uncontrolled atmospheric variation, multiple competing biological ecosystems, random weather phenomena, seismic activity, radiation exposure from stellar proximity, gravitational variations, predatory fauna, poisonous flora, and... He consulted his notes, naturally occurring environmental toxins in the food and water supply. Elena mentally ran through the list. Atmospheric variation, check, Earth had everything from Arctic cold to desert heat. Multiple ecosystems, definitely, Earth's biodiversity was one of its defining characteristics. Random weather, tornadoes, hurricanes, blizzards, heat waves. Seismic activity, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis. Radiation exposure, well, humans did live under a star and, some of them even enjoyed sunbathing. Gravitational variations, not so much, though they did live at different altitudes. Predatory fauna, sharks, bears, big cats, venomous snakes and spiders. Poisonous flora, plenty of toxic plants. Environmental toxins in food and water, unfortunately, yes, especially in more industrialized areas. Ambassador, Elena said slowly, I think your classification system might need some adjustment. Because by your standards, Earth isn't just a Class 12 death world. It's a Class 12 death world that 4 billion humans call home and where we've built a thriving civilization. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the crystalline delegate's unconscious chiming and what might have been Ambassador Veltar quietly praying to whatever deities his species recognized. Captain Chen cleared her throat. So, now that we've established that humans are apparently the galactic equivalent of extremophiles, can we talk about shore leave? Because my crew has been cooped up on that ship for 3 months, and they're really looking forward to exploring the station. The look of absolute terror that passed between the alien delegates suggested that shore leave might be more complicated than expected. The sight that greeted Elena in the station's main plaza the next morning was both hilarious and heartwarming. Three humans in casual clothes, Martinez in his flip-flops and tank top, Dr. Sarah Kim in yoga pants and a light jacket, and engineer Pete Jackson in jeans and a polo shirt, were surrounded by what looked like the galaxy's most paranoid petting zoo. Each human had acquired an entourage of aliens maintaining what they clearly considered a safe distance. The Kalian security detail stayed exactly 15 meters back, their hazmat equipment gleaming under the plaza's artificial sun. A team of crystalline researchers hovered nearby, taking constant readings with instruments that beeped nervously. Even the usually confident hegemony diplomats were maintaining a respectful distance while furiously taking notes. Elena approached with her morning coffee, amused to see that her simple act of drinking a hot beverage caused a ripple of movement through the alien observers, like fish scattering from a shark. "Morning, Elena," Martinez called out cheerfully. He was examining a fountain that featured what the Aquatic Confederation probably considered high art streams of various colored liquids creating complex patterns in zero gravity. "Check this out. Pete thinks we could build something like this back on Earth, maybe for the new Mars colony." "The engineering is fascinating," Pete agreed, pulling out a handheld scanner. "The magnetic field generators are maintaining precise control over multiple liquid streams simultaneously. I bet we could adapt this for zero-G manufacturing processes." The simple act of Pete taking out his scanner caused the nearest Kalian to immediately begin broadcasting warnings about unidentified technology activation in contamination zone. Elena sighed and walked over to the security detail. "Commander Ziltak," she said pleasantly, "that's just a basic spectrometer." Pete's an engineer, he gets excited about interesting technology. He's not trying to weaponize your fountain. The commander's voice crackled through his breathing apparatus. "Dr. Rodriguez, with respect, yesterday we learned that your species naturally emits biological contaminants and lives in what we classify as uninhabitable conditions. Today we discover that your people carry unregistered scanning equipment and show interest in infrastructure systems. You must understand our concern." Elena looked at Pete, who was now kneeling next to the fountain's base, using his scanner to examine the magnetic field generators with the enthusiasm of someone who had found a particularly interesting puzzle. To Pete, it was just cool technology. To the aliens, it probably looked like reconnaissance for some kind of infrastructure attack. "Commander," Elena said patiently, "Pete isn't gathering intelligence for an attack. He's an engineer. This is what engineers do, they see interesting technology and they want to understand how it works. If you asked him to explain magnetic field dynamics for fountain control, he'd talk for hours about flow rates and gravitational compensation and probably offer to help you optimize the system." "Optimize our system?" The suspicion in Ziltak's voice was obvious. "Why would he want to modify our infrastructure?" Before Elena could answer, Pete had apparently overheard the conversation. He looked up from his scanner with the kind of excited expression that Elena recognized as dangerous. Pete had clearly found something interesting. "Oh hey, Commander!" Pete called out, waving enthusiastically. "Your magnetic field generators are really clever, but I think there might be a resonance issue with the tertiary stabilizers. See, the frequency modulation is creating harmonic interference every 47 seconds, which is causing those little fluctuations in the outer streams. If you adjusted the phase relationship by about 12%, you could probably increase efficiency by at least 20% and eliminate the wobble entirely." The silence that followed Pete's technical explanation was broken by Dr. Kim's laughter. "Pete, you've been here 12 hours and you're already trying to fix their stuff." "I'm not trying to fix it," Pete protested. "I'm just saying it could run better. Look, the base harmonics are solid, but the interference pattern is creating unnecessary power drain. It's actually really sophisticated engineering, they just need to fine-tune the resonance coefficients." Elena watched Commander Ziltak frantically consulting with what appeared to be the station's engineering staff over his radio. The conversation was rapid and involved a lot of technical terms that the translator was struggling with. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim had wandered over to examine the plaza's botanical display, a carefully controlled arrangement of plants from various worlds, each in its own environmental bubble. She was taking pictures with her phone, occasionally reaching out to gently touch the barrier fields. Sarah, be careful, Elena warned. I think those environmental fields are the only thing between those plants and what the locals consider a toxic atmosphere. Oh, I know, Kim replied absently, adjusting her phone's camera settings. I'm just documenting the preservation techniques. This is actually brilliant. They've created individual microenvironments for each species. The field generators must be incredibly sophisticated to maintain this many different atmospheric compositions in such close proximity. Kim's casual photography was causing another minor panic among the observers. Elena could hear urgent radio chatter about surveillance activities and documentation of sensitive systems. Dr. Kim. A new voice called out. Elena turned to see Dr. Kethera approaching, still wearing full protective equipment but moving with less obvious fear than the day before. May I ask what you are documenting? Kim looked up with a bright smile. These environmental preservation systems. I'm a botanist, and this is incredible work. How do you prevent atmospheric bleed-through between the different biospheres? The field boundaries must be maintained at the molecular level. Dr. Kethera's insectoid features were difficult to read through her helmet, but Elena detected surprise in her voice. You understand the complexity of the system? Well, I understand the challenges, Kim replied modestly. I work with controlled environments all the time, greenhouse systems, atmospheric processors, hydroponics bays. This is way more advanced than anything we have on Earth, but the basic principles are familiar. Are you using molecular filters or quantum field boundaries? Elena watched in fascination as Dr. Kethera seemed to forget her fear and began gesticulating excitedly. Quantum field boundaries. But the power requirements are enormous, and we have constant problems with field decay in the transition zones. Oh, field decay. Kim nodded enthusiastically. Have you tried rotating field frequency to prevent resonance buildup? We learned the trick working with atmospheric processors on Mars. If you keep the field generators slightly out of phase with each other, it prevents the kind of standing wave formations that cause decay patterns. Dr. Kethera stopped moving entirely. Your species has atmospheric processors? Multiple biospheres? Controlled environment systems? Elena realized that the aliens had been so focused on human environmental tolerance that they hadn't considered the technological implications. A species that could survive in extreme conditions would naturally develop advanced environmental control technology not to protect themselves, but to create habitable spaces for other species or specialized applications. Dr. Kethera, Elena said gently, humans have been building controlled environments for thousands of years. We started with simple shelters and greenhouses, then moved to underwater habitats, space stations, and planetary terraforming. When you live on a world where environmental conditions can kill you, you get very good at building systems to control those conditions. Meanwhile, Pete had apparently convinced someone to let him take a closer look at the fountain's control systems. Elena could see him enthusiastically pointing at various components while a group of station engineers gathered around him. The universal language of technical enthusiasm seemed to be breaking down barriers faster than any diplomatic protocol. The beautiful thing about this design, Pete was saying, gesturing at a complex array of field generators, is that you're using the gravitational differential to assist with flow control. We do something similar in zero-G manufacturing, but not with this level of precision. The computational requirements for real-time adjustment must be incredible. One of the station engineers, a being whose species Elena didn't recognize, was nodding enthusiastically and pointing at various readouts. Despite the language barriers and obvious species differences, Elena could see the universal signs of technical people recognizing each other. Martinez, meanwhile, had discovered the Plaza's food court and was engaged in what appeared to be a detailed culinary discussion with several vendors. Elena could hear him asking questions about ingredients, preparation methods, and whether anyone had anything spicy. Elena! Martinez called out, waving her over. You have to try this. It's like a cross between sushi and curry, but it's designed for silicon-based metabolism. The chef says it's completely inedible for carbon-based life forms, but the flavor profile is fascinating. Elena walked over to find Martinez examining a dish that was literally glowing with what appeared to be mineral compounds. The vendor, a crystalline being, was vibrating with what Elena had learned to recognize as pleasure. "The human appreciates flavor complexity," the vendor chimed. "Most species only seek basic nutritional satisfaction, but your friend asks about subtle taste interactions and preparation philosophy." "Martinez," Elena said carefully, "please tell me you're not planning to actually eat something designed for silicon-based metabolism." "Oh no, definitely not," Martinez replied. "But the chef is explaining the crystallization process they use to create flavor layers. It's giving me ideas for molecular gastronomy back on Earth. Imagine if we could create similar complexity using organic compounds." Elena looked around the plaza and realized something remarkable was happening. The initial fear and panic were giving way to curiosity and fascination. The aliens were beginning to see humans not as walking biological weapons, but as a species that had developed remarkable technologies specifically because they lived in conditions that required constant adaptation. Commander Ziltak approached, his breathing apparatus no longer fogging with stress. "Dr. Rodriguez, may I ask you something in confidence?" Elena nodded. "My engineering staff has been reviewing the human engineer's suggestions about our fountain systems. His recommendations are quite sophisticated. More than that, they're practical. How did your species develop such advanced environmental control technologies?" Elena smiled. "Commander, when your homeworld regularly tries to kill you, you get very good at building systems to keep that from happening. Humans have been modifying environments to suit our needs for thousands of years. We've just gotten very, very good at it." "But why share this knowledge?" Ziltak asked. "Your technological advantages could provide significant strategic benefits." Elena looked around at her colleagues, Pete explaining magnetic field theory to fascinated engineers, Kim discussing botanical preservation with dedicated scientists, Martinez exploring the intersection of chemistry and cuisine with enthusiastic chefs. All of them were doing what humans had always done when they encountered something new and interesting. They were sharing knowledge, asking questions, and looking for ways to make things better. "Commander," Elena said softly, "this is what humans do. We see a problem, we figure out how to solve it, and then we share the solution. Pete isn't looking at your fountain as a strategic asset, he's looking at it as a puzzle that could be optimized. Kim isn't gathering intelligence on your botanical systems, she's excited about the science. Martinez isn't studying your food systems for tactical advantage, he's just fascinated by different approaches to flavor." Ziltak was quiet for a long moment, watching the easy interactions between the humans and station personnel. Finally, he said, "Dr. Rodriguez, I believe we may have misunderstood your species' intentions entirely." Elena grinned. "Commander, I think that's the first step toward a very interesting friendship." 6 weeks after the Great Contamination Scare, as it had come to be known in station records, Elena found herself in the remarkable position of running the galaxy's first interspecies environmental adaptation laboratory. What had started as a diplomatic crisis had evolved into the most productive scientific collaboration in recorded galactic history. The transformation of Station 7 had been extraordinary. The sterile, controlled corridors now featured mixed atmosphere zones where different species could interact without full environmental protection. The humans had worked with station engineers to develop graduated atmospheric controls spaces where environmental conditions could be adjusted gradually, allowing other species to experience controlled exposure to what they had once considered lethal conditions. Elena walked through the new collaborative zones, still amused by the sight of aliens tentatively removing pieces of their protective equipment while humans wandered around in shorts and t-shirts, completely oblivious to the revolutionary nature of what they were witnessing. "Dr. Rodriguez." Commander Ziltak approached, and Elena was pleased to see that he was wearing only minimal breathing assistance, a far cry from the full hazmat suit from their first meeting. "The morning reports from the adaptation trials are remarkable." Elena accepted the tablet he offered, scanning the data with growing excitement. "Ziltak, these numbers are incredible. Your people are adapting to temperature variations that you previously considered impossible." "The human training protocols are extraordinary," Ziltak replied, his voice filled with wonder.
Who would have thought that gradual exposure to environmental stress could actually strengthen physiological resilience? Your Dr. Wong's adaptation therapy is revolutionizing our understanding of biological limits. Through the lab's observation windows, Elena could see Wong working with a group of Kalian volunteers. What had started as basic environmental tolerance testing had evolved into a comprehensive program for expanding species comfort zones. The Kalians were now routinely experiencing temperature variations of 5 degrees, a range that would have been considered lethal just weeks ago. The real breakthrough came when we realized that fear of environmental change was limiting adaptation more than actual physiological constraints, Elena said, watching Wong encourage a Kalian test subject through a humidity variation that had previously triggered panic attacks. Most species never tested their actual environmental limits because their cultural assumptions told them those limits were much narrower than they actually were. Captain Chen approached from the engineering section, her tablet displaying schematics that would have been incomprehensible to most species just a month ago. Elena, you need to see what Pete and the station engineers have accomplished. They walked to the main engineering bay, where the sight that greeted them would have been impossible to imagine during their first day on the station. Humans and aliens work side by side on complex projects, their different environmental needs no longer seen as barriers but as opportunities for innovative solutions. Pete Jackson was in his element, standing in front of a holographic display showing station-wide environmental systems. Around him, engineers from 6 different species were collaborating on modifications that would have seemed like science fiction just weeks ago. The key insight, Pete was explaining to the mixed group, was realizing that environmental variability isn't a bug, it's a feature. Instead of maintaining static conditions throughout the station, we can create dynamic environmental zones that actually improve efficiency and functionality. Dr. Kathara, now working without any protective equipment in the mixed atmosphere zone, nodded enthusiastically. The power savings alone are remarkable. By allowing natural fluctuations within acceptable parameters, we've reduced environmental control energy consumption by 37%. Elena watched as Pete demonstrated the new atmospheric management system. Different zones of the station now maintain different conditions optimized for their specific functions. Research areas had controlled, stable environments. Living spaces offered gentle variations that promoted health and comfort. Recreation areas provided more dynamic conditions that different species could enjoy according to their preferences. But the real innovation, Pete continued, is the adaptive response systems. Instead of fighting environmental changes, the station now works with them. Temperature fluctuations are channeled into thermal energy recovery. Atmospheric pressure variations drive air circulation. Even humidity changes are captured and redirected to systems that can use them. A young crystalline engineer, whose species had once been terrified of any environmental variation, was now eagerly explaining how mineral resonance patterns could be optimized by controlled vibration exposure. The humans taught us that stability isn't the absence of change, it's the ability to handle change effectively. Elena smiled at the philosophical evolution she was witnessing. These species hadn't just learned to tolerate environmental variation, they had learned to embrace it as a source of strength and innovation. Martinez appeared from the direction of the food courts, followed by an unlikely parade of chefs and food technicians from multiple species. Over the past weeks, his exploration of galactic cuisine had evolved into a comprehensive interspecies culinary exchange program. Elena, he called out excitedly. You have to try this new fusion dish we developed. It combines human spice tolerance with crystalline mineral processing and aquatic fermentation techniques. It's completely edible for carbon-based life forms, but it also provides optimal nutrition for silicon-based metabolism. The dish he presented looked like nothing Elena had ever seen, a shimmering, complex structure that seemed to shift colors based on viewing angle. When she tasted it, the flavors were similarly complex, familiar enough to be appealing to human taste buds, but with subtle notes and textures that suggested entirely alien approaches to cuisine. Martinez, this is incredible, Elena said, savoring the unique combination. How did you manage to bridge such different biochemical requirements? That's the beautiful thing, Martinez replied. We stopped thinking about it as different species need different food and started thinking about it as different metabolisms can enhance the same dish.
The crystalline minerals actually amplify certain organic flavors, while the aquatic fermentation process creates compounds that are beneficial for both carbon and silicon-based digestion. Dr. Kethera joined them, carefully tasting the fusion dish with obvious pleasure. Mr. Martinez's approach to interspecies nutrition has implications far beyond cuisine.
We're discovering that many of our assumptions about biochemical incompatibility were based on limited thinking rather than actual constraints. Elena was interrupted by an alert on her tablet.
The daily station-wide environmental report showed readings that would have triggered total evacuation protocols just weeks ago. Now, they were simply labeled as normal operational parameters for multi-species environment. Temperature variations across different station zones ranged from 15 to 35 degrees Celsius. Humidity levels varied from 30 to 80%. Atmospheric composition included controlled variations in oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and trace compounds that accommodated the metabolic needs of dozen different species. Most remarkably, the contamination levels that had initially triggered biohazard alerts were now simply part of the station's normal biological diversity index. Humans still carried their complex microbiomes, aliens still maintained their species-specific environmental preferences, but these differences were now seen as contributing to a healthier, more robust station ecosystem rather than threatening it.
Dr. Rodriguez, a familiar voice called out.
Elena turned to see Ambassador Veltar approaching, and she was startled to realize that the hegemony diplomat was wearing no protective equipment whatsoever. His 6 arms moved freely in the mixed atmosphere, and his usual nervous energy had been replaced by calm confidence.
"Ambassador," Elena said, "you look comfortable." Veltar's expression, which Elena was now able to read clearly without the barrier of a helmet, showed amusement.
"Dr. Rodriguez, I have a confession to make. 3 days ago, I experienced something that my species had considered impossible."
"Oh?" Elena raised an eyebrow.
"I felt cold," Veltar said simply. "Not dangerously cold, not uncomfortably cold, just cool. And, instead of panicking or seeking immediate environmental correction, I found myself thinking, perhaps I should put on a jacket."
Elena laughed. "Ambassador, I think you've just described one of the most fundamentally human experiences possible, recognizing an environmental condition and adapting to it rather than fighting it."
"Exactly." Veltar's enthusiasm was infectious. "And that simple shift in perspective has changed everything.
We're no longer asking how do we protect ourselves from environmental variation. Instead, we're asking how do we adapt to make environmental variation work for us."
Elena looked around the bustling station, where humans and aliens now worked together in ways that would have been unimaginable just weeks ago. The initial fear and confusion had given way to curiosity, collaboration, and innovation. Species that had once seen human environmental tolerance as threatening now viewed it as inspiring. Captain Chen approached with a communication tablet displaying an incoming message header that made Elena's eyes widen.
"Elena," Sarah said quietly, "we're getting requests from 17 different worlds to establish environmental adaptation programs."
Word has spread through the Galactic Communications Network about what we've accomplished here. Elena looked at the message headers, requests from species across the galaxy wanting to learn human approaches to environmental adaptation, technological innovation, and collaborative problem solving. The Death World humans were no longer seen as a curiosity or a threat, but as teachers offering knowledge that could benefit everyone. "There's more," Sarah continued. "The Galactic Council has officially requested that Earth consider joining as a full member, with a specific focus on environmental engineering and interspecies collaboration." Elena felt a rush of pride not just for humanity, but for what they had accomplished together with their new alien friends. They had started with a contamination scare and built something beautiful, proof that differences weren't barriers to be overcome, but resources to be shared.
"Ambassador Veltar," Elena said, "I have a question for you.
When we first arrived, your people classified Earth as a Class 12 Death World.
What classification would you give it now?"
Veltar considered this for a long moment, looking around at the thriving, diverse community they had built together. "Dr. Rodriguez," he said finally, "I think we need to create a new classification entirely."
"Perhaps. Class 1 Life World."
A place where life doesn't just survive, it learns to thrive through challenge, innovation, and cooperation. Elena smiled, sipping her coffee in the mixed atmosphere while around her, the galaxy learned what humans had always known, that the best way to handle a challenging environment wasn't to hide from it, but to adapt, innovate, and share the solutions with everyone who needed them. As Commander Ziltak often said in his evening reports, which had become popular reading throughout the galactic network, the humans didn't bring contamination to our station. They brought possibility.